but wanted to start with the protests that happened this weekend. I wasn't there, but Jenn, my business partner, covered it. Let me play a clip from Jenn's coverage at the much, much larger counter protest. I believe there was like 20 to 25 that ended up showing up for the white supremacists and thousands for the counter protesters against white supremacists. So that is obviously a positive thing, that we're seeing thousands of people show up against hate and bigotry and moving this country backwards. Let me play you a clip. This is Jenn speaking with one of the counter protesters.
I'm here because I think that this is an incredibly huge threat, and we should be here to say never again. Every time that these racist fascists come out and think that their ideas are legitimate, we need to use our free speech to march in the largest numbers possible and get as many people here as we can.
Yeah, definitely. And I keep asking people the same question. You know, a few blocks from here are the white nationalists in our nation's capital, with the, members of the KKK and neo-Nazis. What do you think is giving them the energy to do what they're doing, to try to put other people down?
Well, first of all, they believe that they have their person in the White House. They think that their ideas are given a platform of legitimacy because people like Trump claim that there's violence on both sides when the Nazis were the ones who killed Heather Heyer a year ago. The fact that they claim to be hiding under the banner of free speech but are incredibly violent and bent on violence. And as long as their movements are able to organize, it's relevant to anyone who is for immigrant rights, who's for Black Lives Matter, who's for union rights, who's on the left in any capacity to come out and organize so that our side can win, because even though they think the wind is in their sails, we're the majority and we're going to win.
That's one of the things too, is it was just a year ago that Heather Heyer was murdered at the hands of white nationalists, yet there are so many people here, so many people are coming together of all colors, shapes, sizes, sexual persuasions, everyone is here standing up despite what happened. Do you think that the side of good will win over the side that's happening at Lafayette Square?
I don't think that's inevitable. Oh no. Well, it's a nice flag. None of that is inevitable. What we've learned from this country's history is that this is something that's been embedded since its founding. This was a country founded on slavery and the genocide of native peoples. It's a country where whenever there's been economic crises, there's been the basis for these ideas of scapegoating and hatred to find a platform and an audience. And unless we organize an alternative that is opposed to all those things and actually points to where in society our problems come from, which in this very unequal society, this very oppressive society, clearly comes from the top, including from people like Trump, we're not actually going to have a basis for winning. So I don't think it's inevitable, but I think the fact that we have such a wonderful turnout, that people don't think we need to be complacent, but that we actually need to stand up, is incredibly heartening, and we need to do it every time they show their ugly heads.
Right, and it seems like you guys all on this side have the same signs. Are you part of a particular group?
Yes, I'm with the International Socialist Organization.
Hell yeah!
Great. And where can people hear more about you guys?
So we have two websites. You can hear more about protests like this and about how to fight the right at socialistworker.org, or you can head to our website, internationalsocialist.org.
Well, first of all, can we get a high five for Jenn Dyes? That's great reporting from her. She was there for several hours covering the counter protests, and honestly, there was no way to really for her to get over to interview the white supremacists, because the police basically segregated, is the way to phrase it, the counter protesters with the white supremacists, but there was only 25 of them anyway, so not much to interview. But I thought that that woman spoke very eloquently, and I also think that what's so funny is the white supremacists, a lot of them said, and make sure every single person watching share this video. And also, she's not in the chat room, I think she's doing something, but make sure you give a clap for Jenn. We want to be able to send more people out than just me to report. We're trying to launch Status Coup, if you don't know. It's coming out soon. There's the logo that you can see. We want to get Jenn out in the field. We want to get Ty out in the field. Obviously, I'll be in the field. And eventually, as we grow, get other people out in the field. We're not satisfied simply, bloviating from home. I have mixed feelings, honestly, on the protests from yesterday. It might not be popular to say, but I always keep it real. As great as I think it is that all these people showed up in Washington D.C., and I believe there were other places that people showed up. As great as I think it is that people are showing up against visceral hate, against just straight up like KKK, Jim Crow level racism. As great as it is that you had thousands of people coming out versus like 25, and of course these people are hypocrites. They say, well, they don't come out because they're afraid for their safety. Yeah, welcome to being a black person in America. So you, the white supremacists, are worried about your safety, but the black people who are just looking for this radical thing called equality, black people who are looking to like leave their homes and not be attacked and shot and killed, black people who are looking not to be discriminated in the workplace against, black people who are looking to, dare I say, not be pulled over and sent into prison for a broken taillight, for unpaid parking tickets. Yes, this is black America. And I'm saying it as a white guy who has spoken with a lot of black people in my day. So the white supremacists say, well, they didn't show up because they were afraid for their safety. Well, maybe you should think about the intimidation, the threats, and the hatred you're putting out that make other people afraid for their safety. So that's what I think about that. But I also have a feeling, as great as I think it is, the overt racism, I don't think that's great, the outcry and people showing up against that, I also think we need to keep it real. We need to keep it real. What about the day-to-day systemic economic racism, the day-to-day oppression being perpetrated against African Americans and brown people? I'm not seeing thousands of people. I'm just keeping it real. This isn't like whataboutism. I think it's a great thing that we got all those people out yesterday in DC. But racism is an everyday thing. And sometimes, because I've seen it, the worst of racism isn't the white supremacists going around with tiki torches, which is very vile and awful, but the day-to-day systemic acceptable racism being perpetrated against black people. And I'll give you a perfect example. All these Democrats, all these resistance fighters out yesterday fighting against these white supremacists who verbally say terrible, hateful things. Do you hear most of them talking about Rahm Emanuel in Chicago, a Democrat mayor who has literally set up a tale of two cities and literally is basically segregating the city to try and push black people out? I was just there. I interviewed organizers. I interviewed activists. I am here to tell you that's what's going on. Thank you, Ruth. $2. You're starting to super chat today. There is economic oppression, which is racism and violence, by the way. I remember I was at Netroots Nation last year when I was at the Young Turks, and there was a march against the awful things we saw in Charlottesville, I believe the next day. And a speaker said, right in front of I forget where it was, but it was in front of a historic area in Atlanta. And she said the economic violence that is being perpetrated against African Americans is racism. And we're seeing that all over the country. It did not start under President Trump. It has certainly, obviously, expanded under President Trump. But the violence that is going on and the visceral oppression of black people is not just coming from card-carrying white supremacists. And unfortunately, I think in our society, especially the Twitterization of our country and our media, people want to focus on the clear antagonist, which is the white supremacists that were marching yesterday, all 25 of them. And let me be clear, I'm not upset about the protest yesterday. I think it was a great thing, and I definitely suggest go check out Jenn's videos and Jenn's reporting. You can watch, we cut up, I believe, 3 that are up on this YouTube channel now, and it's on my Facebook page. You could watch the whole stream, facebook.com/Jordan Chariton. I think there was some buffering issues, but for the most part, you could see it. I thought she did a great job from what I was able to watch. But we can't just go and show up at rallies where we're fighting against clear boogeymen. Like, for example, there was a protest in Chicago that I covered when I was there. There was a protest, and now it's back to daily life in Chicago. Where is the protest outside Mayor Rahm Emanuel for gentrifying the city? Where are the protests outside Mayor Rahm Emanuel's office demanding he stop funneling millions and millions and millions of dollars into his donors and developers that fill his coffers, and start putting some money into the south side of Chicago? Start investing in the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago. Start investing in actual education instead of closing 50 schools. I don't see those kind of protests with thousands of people. Not just once. They need to be ongoing. I don't see the Democratic Party going against racism like that, because that is racism. When you make decisions as politicians, maybe you sound lovely. Maybe you tweet out nice things. Maybe you don't sound like Donald Trump. But your policies, like Rahm Emanuel, and it's not just Rahm Emanuel, are racist. So, for example, we were just in Flint again, my 12th time in Flint, by the way. There are 3 to 5 hour lines wrapped around at churches. At churches. 4 years after they poisoned the majority of Flint. Flint, I believe, is 57% African American, and there's a hell of a lot of white poor people. So it's not just a black thing in Flint. There's poor people, black and white. Well, in what country? This is the leader of the free world, but over 4 years later, there's still people on lines for 3 to 5 hours. I remember I was there at 11:30 in the morning. The first person I talked to was there starting at 7 in the morning, all to get 2 cases of water. Well, look at the rest of Michigan right now. They found a PFOA problem. I can never pronounce it right, but it's called poroflanatic acids. It's a cancer-causing chemical. They have found that in the water in many parts of Michigan. These are the chemicals used to make things like Teflon and cookware. Well, in other communities, frankly, mostly middle-class white people, holy shit, is Governor Rick Snyder acting quickly. Let me tell you, he is acting very quickly on that. And they are passing out bottled water for those folks, which they should. Middle-class white people who are poisoned should get help just the same as poor black and white people. But, so that's getting immediate attention. That's getting urgent attention. Let me remind you, the media never covered this. Might have been a good thing to tell since he was running for vice president. Mike Pence in Indiana. When he was governor, well, guess what? East Chicago, Indiana, predominantly black and Latina, had a lead crisis that is still currently a crisis. Major environmental calamity there. Lead in the soil, in the water. They had arsenic. They had bacteria. And guess what? Guess what? Mike Pence never went down there, and they have barely started cleaning that mess up. And people that I met there, I've been there 6 times, are sick and getting no help. But when Greentown, Indiana had a water contamination issue, oh, Mike Pence, he got down there lickety-split, fixed in 2 months. That is violent racism. It might not be a white supremacist dropping the N-word. It might not be a white supremacist screaming, we need to go back to the 1950s. It might not be a white supremacist saying, get the hell out of our country, and trying to ban people. And that's my problem with the resistance. It's not consistent. It's easy to be against Donald Trump. It's easy to be against the Republican Party. It's trendy also to be against both. What's not easy is to be against racism in all its forms. What's not easy is to be against imperialism in all of its forms. And that's what America is, folks. We are built on structural racism and oppression. That's what we're built on. I had a conversation with someone on Saturday. She's trying to get into the media. I think she's super smart. And she's having a hard time getting picked up on air. And I told her, because I worked in corporate media, I got news for you. If they have a choice between you, who is not a white woman, and a pretty white girl, most of these outlets are going to pick the pretty white girl. There is systemic racism built into our whole society. So, as great as I think it is for thousands of protesters to come out, I think that is needed. Two things could be true. I think that's great. Again, I implore you, go check out Jenn's reporting. But on the other end, where are the protests in Flint? Where are the protests in Chicago? And we need more than just protests. You want to scream, shut up, Jordan, and be for the Democratic Party. We need to take out Trump. Okay, so if I do that, if Jimmy Dore does that, and Lee Camp does that, and Kyle from the Secular Talk does that, and all your favorite independent journalists do that, if we just shut up and say, give us the Democrats to retake the House, then what? Is Cory Booker as president going to make things better for black people in Chicago? Kamala Harris? Kirsten Gillibrand? Joe Biden? Hell no. The bottom line is, I don't care. I don't care what a Democratic politician says, or if they sound more lovely than Donald Trump. And don't get me wrong, Donald Trump is a stain on America. He's a terrible person, first of all, and a terrible politician. And he's racist. But all it takes, I've been fortunate to be able to go out into the country. When you go out into the country, you see that the most striking racism, and the racism that affects everyday black people, brown people, indigenous people, handicapped people, is not the ones from white supremacists going around. It's the daily oppression, economic and social, that is put on by our rigged political system. And that's why I don't just jump on the bandwagon being Trump, evil, Trump, awful, let's get rid of Trump, put Nancy Pelosi back in. I mean, for God's sakes, when Barack Obama, the first African-American president, was president, I mean, I think we had unprecedented levels of police violence that have only gotten worse. He didn't do anything. Barack Obama didn't put in government jobs programs in inner cities, in Baltimore, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Flint, Detroit. I mean, he didn't. Period. So that's what I believe. I think as much as I think it's as great as I think it is to see young people, older people out, I think they need to be out for everything.